Welcome to the recording of the first webinar in the Horse-Centered Practitioner series. I apologize that we weren't able to be together live as planned this afternoon due to internet service issues on my end, but I'm back up for now and running, so I'm excited to at least be able to record the presentation portion and get this out to you in a timely manner. Thank you for setting aside the time to watch and to reflect intentionally throughout this series. It means to truly place the horses at the center of our equine practice or business. For those who may not know me, my name is Kim Hallen, and I'm the author of Horse Wisdom: Life Lessons for Humanity. I live just outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm the owner and founder of Unbridled, which is a unique, although I hope won't be so unique for very much longer, but it is for now a unique equine experiential learning business with the tagline of horses healing humans, healing horses. I've been fine-tuning my personal approach to facilitating equine-assisted learning for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I had a 20-year career in higher education fundraising and nonprofit management, during which time horses never stopped being my true passion, even when they were primarily a hobby in my life. My vision from the beginning of launching Unbridled has been to design programs and services that are equally healing and mutually supportive for both horses and humans. The past 5 years have been a grand adventure in using my personal business as a living, learning laboratory where I'm free to explore and push the boundaries of what's possible in the realm of equine experiential learning. I'm really excited to share through this special webinar series some of my most profound discoveries that I've made that I believe truly have the potential to revolutionize the equine industry of the future. And of course, that's where you come in, because meaningful systemic change is never accomplished by one person alone. This webinar is part 1 of a 3-part series. And today I'll be peeling back the layers of what it really means to put relationships first, starting with our horses. Putting the relationship first has become such a common phrase in the horse industry that it now means many different things to many different people. Unfortunately, sometimes the words don't match the behavior and choices being made by the person who's saying the words. My goal with Unbridled has been to look to the horses to confirm what it means to nurture truly healthy relationships and communities. Horses don't carry the burden of trying to meet human society's norms and pressures, which muddy the waters for us. Horses are able to approach the work of relationship building from a much more authentic, pure, and unadulterated perspective. At the foundation of my approach to facilitation is an ongoing personal commitment to the study of wild herd behavior, coupled with observation and reflection around what makes domestic life so much more stressful for horses. And what I keep coming back to is this: not all communities or relationships are created equal. When our community is made up of familiar, trusted individuals, this helps us feel safe and supported. But when our community is unstable, in constant flux, or when the individuals who make up the community are out of balance, either physically, mentally, or emotionally, this creates feelings of insecurity and vulnerability for all the members. This is a universal truth, and it applies to communities of any species, as well as cross-species and multi-species communities. The specific set of factors that will create feelings of safety can vary from one community to another, but some of the most common factors include familiarity, trust, honesty, personal agency, effective communication, and respect for boundaries. In the wild, horses work hard to identify companions they feel comfortable forming usually lifelong or at least long-term connections with, just like we enjoy doing that. The members of these mutually formed free choice equine bands in the wild tend to be exceptionally loyal, and they often do stick together for life. By contrast, the average domestic horse experiences 7 to 10 transfers of ownership during their lifetime. And even those horses who are lucky enough to have one lifetime owner still have the incredible challenge of living with herd mates they did not choose. Transitions from one boarding facility, property, or environment to another are also unnatural and stressful for our domestic horses. We humans know this from our own experiences when we move to new places, adjust to new work environments, or learn to navigate in unfamiliar situations. It's stressful for us too. Humans in today's modern world struggle just as much as horses do to nurture and maintain long-term, stable communities that we feel safe in. This is one significant way that horses and humans are far more alike than we've been conditioned to think. Unfortunately, the traditional horse industry often mislabels empathy as anthropomorphism and insists that anyone who is guilty of anthropomorphism has committed a mortal sin. But one of the most important aspects of relationship building in any species is recognizing what's similar between us, as well as what's different. And as horse-centered equine business owners and practitioners, we actually have a golden opportunity to demonstrate that empathy is not the same as anthropomorphism, and also that nurturing healthy, stable communities empowers us to facilitate learning environments that foster feelings of safety for everyone. In today's post-COVID world, experiences of safe community are needed in the human world more than ever. The desire to be part of a healthy, safe community is a natural and instinctual drive for all living beings, because feedback from others is precisely what enables us to understand who we are. Without interactive feedback, we have no way to understand what our place is, what our place of meaning is, whether it's in personal relationships, in our communities, or in the broader world. Whether we're talking about horses or humans, there are three factors that are guaranteed to spawn feelings of vulnerability. The first is when we find ourselves in a position where we have little or no power or control over our own situation. The second is when we experience a real or perceived lack of choice and agency. And the third is when we feel isolated, especially from others we trust and from environments that support our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Whether we want to think about it or not, the painful truth is that domestic horses live a life of captivity. We may love our horses with all our hearts, but no amount of love can change the fact that we're also their captors. Only when we openly acknowledge the complex layers of this truth are we able to also acknowledge and honor the uneven power dynamics that are inherent in the modern horse-human relationship. This power dynamic makes it incredibly easy for humans to spark feelings of vulnerability and lack of agency in our horses. It's also worth noting that there is an uneven power dynamic in the traditional human teacher to human learner hierarchy as well. This means that traditional equine establishments are wrought with uneven power dynamics that perpetuate and normalize unhealthy relationships. Lack of agency is a topic I really wanted to focus on in today's webinar because choice is another term that's currently being thrown around a lot in the horse industry, particularly when it comes to debates over which training method is most humane or ethical. Here you see a photograph of my very first horse. Her name was Lilith, and she's with my oldest nephew, Eric. And this is when Eric was very young. What you see happening here in this photo between Eric and Lilith is really interesting because although most of us would label the interaction we see in this photo as kind and compassionate, there's actually nothing really healthy or organic about the relationship dynamics you see here. Lilith had been trained using kind, humane, and ethical methods to stand calmly when tied. If you look closely in the photo, you can see that the lead rope is merely wrapped around the post. It's not even tied. Lilith could easily escape if she so chose. Yet it's clear from her expression that she doesn't actually believe she has that choice. Little Eric was simply following the instructions that my husband and I were giving him about how to touch Lilith in a gentle and respectful way. He's clearly present with us, but he's not present with Lilith, and he's also not present with himself. Neither of the individuals in this photograph are operating out of personal agency. Both are simply doing what they've been told or what they've been taught. Here's a challenging truth that I myself have had to work hard to make peace with, because for much of my own life, I took great pride in becoming a skilled horse trainer. But the truth is that all training methods are based in a hierarchical way of relating that is inherently unhealthy and unnatural, particularly when it becomes the prevailing mode of operation for any relationship. If we're training, this means we're using one or more of the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning to modify our horse's behavior. Those 4 quadrants are positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. I'm not going to get into operant conditioning or training methods today, or even in this webinar series. But what I now understand is that it's extremely important to acknowledge that when we're training, regardless of what training method we're using, we are always the ones determining what the end result will or should be. We may give the horse varying degrees of freedom, choice, and voice within the larger control dynamic, but at the end of the day, or month, or year, or a lifetime, the horse never really has true agency in a training relationship, because the horse doesn't have the power to decide when we will show up for training, what method of training we'll choose to use, or what our training goals are. Now, I want to stop here and say that I'm definitely not anti-training, so I don't want to give that impression. In the domestic world that we currently live in, animal ownership is the reality. And within that reality, training can make captive life much easier, much less stressful, and much safer for both horses and humans. But we need to learn how to honor that reality and not fool ourselves believing that power dynamics inherent in training represent healthy relationships. Healthy relationships require that everyone involved has personal agency. Merriam-Webster provides the following definition of agency: the capacity of an individual to actively and independently choose and to effect change. Merriam-Webster also defines it as agency as free will or self-determination. The 2 photos on this slide are of the same horse. His name was Marcus, and these 2 photos were taken many years apart. The photo on the left was when Marcus was a young adult being competed as a jumper. By all human accounts, Marcus loved his job as a hunter. And most of us who look at this photo would probably agree that Marcus looks like a happy horse doing something he loves. Marcus was later retired at the age of 14 due to an aggressive but benign form of equine melanoma. Despite his impressive pedigree and track record in the show ring, Marcus was sold to me at age 15 for $1 because his previous owner could no longer justify the cost of his care when he failed to be able to earn his keep as a jumper or a lesson horse. By that time, Marcus's body was riddled with fast-growing tumors that made it impossible for him to wear tack or carry a rider comfortably. His owner loved him dearly and wanted to give him a chance to live out his final months or years just being a horse. Unfortunately, her own conditioning in the horse industry made it impossible for her to wrap her head around providing on her own what Marcus needed and deserved. So after her 18-hand gentle giant of a horse got booted out of several boarding facilities because he kept getting beaten up by the other horses after they tried to turn him out and retire him, this is when she begged me to take him. Because Marcus had spent his whole life up to that point living in stalls with private turnout, just like many show horses do, he had no idea how to be a horse. So whenever anyone attempted to integrate Marcus into their herd, he had so much anxiety that he would either freeze and drop to the ground in a spontaneous onset colic, or he would freeze and get beaten up by the other horses. Especially, he would do the drop and go into colic when the other horses did things he didn't understand or that made him feel vulnerable. He just didn't know how to handle it. When he came to me, it took 2 years of patient mentoring from me, from the participants in my program, and from the other horses in my small herd to help Marcus gain enough confidence to feel comfortable in his own skin, just to be a horse who lived with other horses. But eventually he did start actively participating in herd play sessions. And the photo on the right was taken the very first time I ever saw Marcus playing with true personal agency on his own terms. So what you see in that photo on the right is a jump of pure joy with feelings of freedom. Notice how different Marcus's body posture, expression, and energy are when he was jumping for joy on the right versus when he was enjoying his job on the left. In one photo, Marcus is demonstrating confidence born out of empowered personal agency, right? He's playing with his herd mates who respect his right to improvise and do his own thing as long as he respects their boundaries and is operating in the spirit of co-creation during their play session, right? So, but in the other photo, Marcus is demonstrating a different kind of confidence that was born out of knowing how to do the specific job he was trained to do in a very specific way. Did Marcus feel safe in both of these scenarios? I can't say for sure, but my guess is yes. But the bigger question is, was his relationship with the others involved in both scenarios healthy and empowered? I would have to say probably no, because relationships based in unhealthy power dynamics can sometimes look very pretty on the outside. This is true in the human world as well. They can even feel safe in kind of a controlling or submissive way on the inside. Learning from horses what truly healthy relationships and communities look and feel like, where personal agency is promoted, encouraged, and expected for every member, allows us to facilitate experiences with horses in their herd communities that give our human participants a unique opportunity to observe, feel, and become part of a healthy community where the individuals have healthier relationships with one another than what we typically can experience in the human world, which is rampant in hierarchical organization and systems. It's also a very different experience than the traditional experience of relationship between horses and humans, like the one you see on the left. Ethologists who study wild horses have documented time and again that hierarchical organization and behavior is not the norm in wild horse herds. And yet the horse industry continues to perpetuate this myth, which in turn is used to justify power and control dynamics as a supposedly, quote, natural and healthy form of leadership. It turns out that the herd pecking order, which is a very real thing, but that we humans took the liberty of deciding for ourselves was the horse's natural way of operating and organizing, is actually only one of many different methods of organization horses call upon to cope effectively with stressful situations. Specifically, the herd pecking order appears to be called upon as a tool for reducing competition and all-out aggression in situations where limited access to one or more highly valued resources makes it impossible for the horses to share without violating one another's personal space. In other words, the herd pecking order is not a form of leadership at all. It's a coping strategy. In the wild, the herd pecking order is not utilized very often because vital resources, including air, grass, water, and trusted companions, are readily available to all with little need for competition. When we understand the dynamics at play behind the competitive behaviors we see in domestic horses that are kept together and fed together in relatively small spaces, often with less trusted or unfamiliar herd mates, it becomes much easier to also notice the overwhelming evidence that when horses, whether wild or domestic, are given adequate space and empowered to live with trusted long-term companions and without excessive unnatural reasons to compete being added to their environment, that horses actually model an incredibly peaceful and collaborative approach to shared leadership that isn't static or hierarchical at all. Most equestrians are intimately familiar with at least two of the three primary stress responses associated with activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, even if we don't know that that's what it's called. These stress responses occur when a potentially life-threatening situation is detected. The two stress responses are fight and flight. Humans actually share these same survival stress responses, as do all animals with a spine. Recent studies, scientific studies, have confirmed that the flight response is actually initiated in the spine. But few of us are taught to be cognizant of the third, sometimes much more subtle stress response that is triggered when the horse, or humans, brain determines that either survival is impossible, resulting in freeze or tonic immobility, or that personal agency is impossible, resulting in learned helplessness, submission, fawning, which is also pleasing, or disassociation. These responses can be triggered when the perceived threat is temporary or permanent. The photos on this slide show some examples of surrendering in the face of physical constraints, such as tying or hobbling. At this point, I want to refer back to the training mindset that is rampant in the horse industry, which conditions humans to believe that submission, learned helplessness, fawning or pleasing, and disassociation, which are all forms of surrender, are healthy. If you take nothing else away from today's presentation, I hope you will leave understanding that surrender is a coping strategy, triggered by the belief that personal agency is unattainable or unrecoverable, at least temporarily. Relationships that trigger surrendering behaviors in horses or humans are simply not healthy relationships. My commitment to learning from horses what they view as healthy in their relationships has helped me understand how very important it is that we also understand and teach the difference between a training relationship based in power and control versus a healthy relationship based in personal agency and shared leadership. Because the implications of this awareness reach far beyond our relationships with horses. Horses have taught me that the foundation of healthy relationships includes a genuine desire to understand the experience of another. And that's also empathy or attunement. Neither empathy nor attunement are anthropomorphism. So again, I want to make that clear distinction, recognizing what's similar in us between horses and humans is not anthropomorphism. We do also need to recognize the differences because there are also significant differences, but we can't, we do a real disservice to the relationship if we ignore the things that are similar. Another foundation of healthy relationship is respect for personal space and honoring one another's boundaries. This actually leads to agency. Clear, honest communication includes listening, and it includes embodying what our true intentions are. That's clear, honest communication. And a spirit of collaboration, co-creation, and allowing. Then there's the foundation of a healthy herd community. And if we look at the horse's model of this, it includes freedom to behave and make choices out of free will. Again, this goes back to agency. Respect for personal space. Honest communication, yet again, but particularly in community, honest communication about boundaries. Alignment and attunement, which includes mirroring and synchrony to nurture healthy connection. You see this photo, one of my participants who was not a horse person, just naturally finding a way to mirror when she was with Rayleigh and build connection that way. Healthy community also includes sensory presence, and that means being present to what's going on internally and what's going on externally. Movement. Horses in the wild are always in gentle movement unless they're sleeping or resting, but most of the time they're in gentle movement. And then the other foundation of a healthy community is balance. Again, this is balance for each individual and then balance in the community. Now I want to switch gears a little and talk about the practical applications for us as equine professionals. We have a golden opportunity right now to reshape humanity's perception of horses. and of our ways of relating to horses. I know from the work I've been doing with Unbridled that when this starts to happen, it also deepens and broadens our understanding of ourselves and our relationships with one another in really beautiful ways. When we learned how to be healthier in relationships with horses, we also learn how to be healthier in our relationships generally. So what does this look like for me in my work? And what are some activities and exercises you might want to consider incorporating into your own business and programs? At the core of my approach to facilitating equine assisted learning is what I call guided herd observation. And I use guided herd observation first to teach about equine behavior and body language. Second, to practice non-judgmental observation skills. And third, to notice how the horses manage space, honor personal boundaries, communicate honestly, share leadership, and embrace personal agency. Facilitating engaging and meaningful guided herd observation sessions does not require that you become an instant expert in interpreting equine behavior, herd dynamics, or body language. All of those things can be very helpful and add a lot of depth to guided herd observation, but the most important skills for facilitating effective herd observation are a willingness to be curious and embrace the unknown, a love for collaborative exploration, a willingness to acknowledge what we don't know or have yet to discover and fully understand, the ability to withhold judgment and to embrace possibilities that stretch our current comfort zones. My students and participants, especially those without previous experience and conditioning in the horse industry, often see things far more clearly than I do. And it's not for me to decide or to limit what a participant may take away from their own experience of observing and learning from horses. My job is simply to create a safe, open, and welcoming atmosphere for collaborative learning and to share whatever knowledge I have that may be helpful and supportive to the synergy of the day. What I try my best not to do is go into a session with a predetermined idea of what the learning outcome is supposed to be. By keeping this open, allowing nature, I'm actually able to offer the experience of engaging in a healthier approach to being in relationship and community, one that honors and mirrors the way the horses naturally operate. Guided herd observation can be facilitated from outside the pasture, as you see me doing here in this photograph, or from inside the pasture. However, when you invite participants inside the pasture, there will be a few more safety concerns and precautions. My recommendation is that you have a high degree of familiarity with the members of the herd, the horses in your herd, before you invite participants in, just so you are able to read their body language and know a little bit about how they interact, if they so choose to interact with people. I always also recommend starting with observation from outside and waiting until all the horses and all the human participants are feeling relaxed and at ease and safe, and everyone has a general understanding of how to nurture and maintain feelings of peace in the community, personally and in the community, before we go inside. And although we're not live today, so we're not going to have a live Q&A, we can talk more about safety precautions either in the Facebook group or I may actually schedule a time for us to have a little personal live discussion, since we couldn't be live together for the webinar today. So we can talk more about safety precautions in one of those avenues. When horses are given permission to release their own conditioning around the horse-human relationship, they will begin to behave much more authentically. This includes becoming more curious, more trusting, and more respectful. Best of all, the horses will find their own unique ways to help us understand just how supportive and healing it feels to be in healthy relationship and healthy community. There are also some simple exercises I've developed to allow participants to explore what it means to actively participate in supporting the creation of a healthy herd community. I call the activity you see pictured here joining the herd, and it simply involves following the horse's example of shared leadership. Each human is encouraged to notice the spacing and positioning of the horses individually and collectively, and to explore where they feel compelled to position themselves in relation to both the horses and one another in order to add to the overall feeling of balance and cohesiveness. This exercise can be done with an individual or a group. Here you see 5 horses and 3 people. Last week, I facilitated this exercise with 15 people and 3 horses. It works just as beautifully regardless of the numbers or ratios. The more I've explored the power of this really simple exercise, the more I've come to understand that less structure and guidance actually makes the experience more powerful. Humans rarely have the opportunity to explore their role in creating and maintaining a healthy community. When participants get to do that practice in a magical, safe, and engaging environment with horses, just wow, right? I mean, they love it. So give your participants plenty of time to lean into this exploration and make it their own. As facilitators or teachers, it's our job to keep our eyes open and monitor for signs of stress or distress, whether it's from the horses or the humans, and to respond or intervene accordingly. But most of all with this exercise, if you play with it at home, I want you to be sure to build in plenty of time for debriefing and reflection afterwards, because you'll be amazed at the kinds of reflections that bubble up with this really simple exercise. As horse-centered practitioners, it's our job to create and design learning experiences that model what horses value most: healthy community. In so doing, we ourselves are naturally empowered to hold and facilitate spaces that will feel safe for our human participants as well. I personally strive to create safe space for collaborative learning around equine and human behavior, for personal exploration and reflection without control or judgment, for practicing presence, whether it's internal or external, for honing observation skills, which is a huge life skill, even away from horses, for celebrating agency, autonomy, interdependence, and authenticity, for honoring and communicating boundaries, and for nurturing healthy community. One of the final thoughts I want to leave you with today is that it's possible to embrace the qualities of healthy relationship and healthy community, even when facilitating one-to-one horse-human sessions or lessons. I don't do much of that anymore. I actually prefer to do the herd-based sessions at my farm, but I used to do some. And if we keep the horse close to its herd community, if we monitor for signs of stress and vulnerability and adjust accordingly, we can help our horses feel safe and relaxed, even when they're not in their herd community. From there, it's just a matter of releasing our need to control, direct, or force outcomes. With practice, we can learn to embrace curiosity, encourage exploration, which supports both the horse and the human in maintaining as much agency in the relationship as possible. So these 2 photos are simple examples. The one on the left was this young man was here, and he didn't really know how to connect with the horse, and he was a little bit lost and distressed about that. And we were just talking about what does he enjoy doing and what's fun for him when he's outside. And he said he loved to play soccer. And I happened to have this jolly ball that was sitting in the paddock with them already. And I said, well, there's a ball right there. Why don't you, if you feel like playing soccer, if that's what you enjoy, why don't you do that? And it was so interesting. As soon as he stopped thinking about, how to force a connection with the horse and just started expressing his own true nature and what he enjoyed doing, of course, Puck got really interested in what he was doing. So there was no training here. There was no, he wasn't rewarding this behavior. There was no conditioning. He just started playing with the ball, and then Puck got really interested. And then I just let them do what kids do, right? And they started creating their own game together, and turned into a really beautiful session where he figured out that he could communicate really well with the horse just by being his authentic self and using very honest energy and, authenticity. And then the picture on the right was a young girl who wanted to connect with Tempo, who is one of my horses who is really sensitive about touch, can get really triggered by touch. So I explained to her a little bit about all the horses beforehand, and she was really drawn to Tempo. She knew what Tempo's issues were around touch, and even that Tempo can sometimes be a little bit aggressive if she gets triggered. And this young lady said she actually said she could relate to that a lot, and she understood, and she wanted to connect with Tempo. And they spent almost 2 hours with no words, very little guidance from me. I was just there to make sure everything went safe. And she just spent a lot of time, as you see here, mirroring Tempo. Whatever Tempo did, they ended up making a game of it. If Tempo stomped a fly, she would stomp her foot. If Tempo shook her head, the little girl would shake her head. So they just built a beautiful connection throughout over these 2 hours. And pretty soon we're kind of walking around together and moving around together. And the participant had a lovely time and really, I think, got to explore and understand a lot about herself as she was seeing herself in Tempo as they interacted. So there's back to that empathy. It's not anthropomorphism. So this is sometimes as a facilitator, it can feel like we're not doing anything when we allow these really organic interactions to happen, but we're actually doing quite a bit by holding space for a healthy relationship to have an opportunity to be explored and blossom in these sessions. I want to show you a few other pictures that just give examples. And these two photos are of the same horse. His name was Shoki. And in the top photo, that's me and Shoki many, many years ago. And I was engaged at that time in a training relationship with Shoki. That's what our relationship was about. And he was on a very loose line here, and he was following me without any force. A lot of people would say it was voluntary, but he knew what he was supposed to do. And even though it's lovely, he looks pretty happy, and his expression is fairly happy. Although if you look at his expression in that photo and you look at his expression in the photo below, I think you'll see a lot of a difference in the amount of life you see in his eyes. His eyes are soft in both photos, but there's a lot more going on in the bottom photo in terms of his feelings, him being emotionally alive. So in the top photo, he was lacking really any true personal agency in that interaction. And in the bottom photo, this was many years later, when I was already had started Unbridled and was working with the horses at Liberty with full agency. And Shoki decided that there's a fence between these two. The gentleman is leaning over the fence. There was a whole group here, and Shoki chose who he wanted to approach and who he wanted to interact with. And he and this gentleman just had a really beautiful connection. And you can see, how Shoki chose to interact when he had personal agency. And again, you can feel the difference in, I think you can feel the difference in those photos in terms of the energy Shoki's feeling and the amount of agency and life and control and exploration and curiosity in him when he has agency versus when he doesn't have agency, even though both are lovely. Horse community would call them lovely interactions. These next two photos just are an example of synchrony with agency. So there's no halter, lead rope, no tools. I wasn't even asking Marcus to walk with me here. Marcus was actually, we were moving between pastures during a session, and the whole herd was coming. So it was kind of like a group activity. It wasn't really a one-on-one activity, but I decided to connect in an authentic way with Marcus as he was walking. So I actually joined him as he was walking. And you can see that I initially started out intentionally mirroring my legs with his legs. So the photo on the left, Marcus was really tall and his legs are a lot longer than mine. So step by step, I couldn't stay in sync with him. So it was usually like 2 steps together, and then we'd be off for a step. And then as you see in the next photo, it's like our opposite legs are mirroring each other. So we would be connected for 2 strides that felt like mirroring, and then there'd be an off stride, and then we'd connect again. And what I noticed, and I could tell he noticed, was it felt different in the strides when our legs were mirroring each other. And then there was that off stride, and it was like we both wanted to get back into sync again. So this is just a way, there's no real agenda here, there's no goal here. It's just a moment of authentic connection where we both have agency to behave as we're choosing to behave, and the connection is completely voluntary. So here we have another example of agency versus lack of agency. This is not the same two horses in these photos. So on the photo on the left, this is Rayleigh, my horse Rayleigh, and he's behaving with complete agency during a session. I had been bent over actually looking at and talking about my pig, who is below the photo. He's down below me to the left below the photo. And I had been having my focus was on the pig. And Rayleigh, of his own accord, sauntered up behind me really quietly. I didn't even hear him, and started nibbling on the phone that was in my back pocket. Rayleigh is a very playful, confident, curious guy. And when he feels in control of his own experience, that really comes out. He shifts a lot, and he tends towards shut down if you put a halter on him and he starts to feel he's lost agency. He has a lot of trauma past. You'll learn more about in the next week's webinar. You'll learn more about each of the horses' stories. But he felt really in control of his experience. And when this happens, it helps the participants, even if they're outside the fence like this and they're not in with him, they get to know his personality a little bit. Now look at that, look at the photo on the right. And this one, I was going, this was early on when I first started facilitating, and I was kind of choosing which horses would go into a session. And I went to go retrieve Marcus. And obviously I wanted to make sure he would come with me willingly. I wasn't even using a halter. I just asked him to come with me with a hand under his chin. But that's not agency, right? That's not actually, it's not Marcus's idea to do that. Not the way that it was for Puck to participate in the soccer game. This was my idea, and it's very soft and gentle, and there's nothing wrong with this. I just have to recognize that this is a situation where I'm in control and I'm the one deciding what's going to happen in the relationship. So I just wanted you to kind of feel the difference. And again, I think you can see the difference in the level of engagement and curiosity and I want to say playfulness, but just aliveness that you see in their faces and in their expressions here. All right, let's see. I'm gonna go, got one more here. Actually, two more. So these are again the same. So these are the same two horses in both photos. In both photos, this is Shoki. He's the horse with the long blaze, and Rayleigh, he's the horse with the white star. That's more reddish. So these are the same two horses. And in the photo on the left, that one was taken the very first time I introduced these two horses, or at least the first time I put them together. They had been introduced over the fence. And both horses were feeling obviously a little vulnerable. They didn't know each other yet. They both felt insecure, and they're illustrating it in different ways. The second photo on the right, which you've already seen, but I wanted to show it again, was 2 years later when these two geldings have developed a very trusting and playful relationship. I wanted to share this comparison to underscore that change. And specifically to understand that change that is forced on domestic horses, like changes in herd makeup, changes that aren't voluntary in terms of the horses that live together, they create a great deal of stress, and it does take time for horses to adjust to that, and we often need to support them. But I also want to show that horses are incredibly adept at making most relationships work when given time, space, and personal agency, where they get to work it out themselves on their own terms. Now, there's a lot to that. There's a lot about being able to support horses through those kinds of transitions, but it is very possible. So this is the difference between how these two horses were interacting when they felt vulnerable and when they had trust together. So this is the last one I'm going to show you, the last series of photos, but this is again, so I showed you synchrony with agency when it was me and Marcus walking together. This is members of my herd who've been together for a long time. So on the left, you have Tempo and Shoki, mutual grooming. Shoki actually raised Tempo from the time she was born. They're very close. She considered him a father figure. But even so, they didn't groom like this very often. Tempo and her mother Puck mutual groom a lot. But this might have been the photo that was the very first time I saw them mutual groom. And it wouldn't last very long, right? They would just do it. They both had the urge. It was voluntary. They both had agency. They both decided, yeah, let's co-create, let's collaborate and feel what this feels like. Feels good for a few minutes, and then they're like, yeah, okay, that's enough, right? So they're in complete control, how it happens, when it happens, why it happens, if it happens, and when it ends. And then the photo on the right just shows their legs aren't exactly mirrored. Tempo and Shoki, actually, their front legs are pretty mirrored. They're the two further away. And Puck is a little bit ahead of them in stride, but their spacing is really quite even. And you can just tell they're very much in alignment here and in synchrony. And this isn't, they weren't trained to do this. This is all just organic and spontaneous and being done with personal agency. And this last photo is just to show you again some photos of different scenarios where I've done group learning where the horses have agency. So the larger photo on the left is again a herd observation where we're seated on the outside and you can see the horses inside. And you know, it's so fun. I can just begin the conversation sort of introducing the horses, talking a little bit about horse behavior and wild horse behavior. And then the participants start asking questions and I allow their questions to guide where the session's going to go for the day. And I trust that what is intended to come up for the group that day will come up. And it is amazing to watch that what the horses do, they always seem to do the right thing on the right day that brings up exactly what the participants needed to explore or reflect on or think about. So I've really learned to trust that. I used to be afraid that nothing was going to happen and that this was going to be boring. But the sessions I facilitate, the best ones are typically 2 to 3 hours and no one's ever bored. Everyone's always surprised at how fast it goes. So that's all I can say is play around with this and just let yourself have fun. We all know that observing horses is endlessly interesting and entertaining. And believe it or not, even for non-horse people, it's almost even more so for them. Then the photo on the upper right is another photo of the join the herd kind of exercise. This is 4 horses and 2 humans who are, you know, just playing around with where to be so that the horses, they feel like they're adding balance and actually adding balance to the herd community. And what happens is when one horse or one human shifts, then they notice that the others all shift as well. And one of the most empowering things about this exercise is if they're nervous about it, because a lot of participants are worried that they are going to make a mistake or do something that will upset the horses. And I said that this is the beautiful thing about healthy community. As long as you don't go into the horse's personal space and disrupt their energy intentionally, you can't really make a mistake, because if you put yourself somewhere where they don't feel comfortable, guess what? The horses are going to shift and put themselves in a place where they feel more comfortable. It's like always having others who have your back rather than pointing their finger or casting judgment or telling you you've made a mistake. They're just going to shift and say, oh, well, here, let me show you where that feels balanced for me. And then every time one shifts, others shifts. And so that's back to this idea of movement in healthy community. It's not stagnant. We don't stay in one place, but we're constantly shifting and feeling how it feels to be in relation with everyone at the same time, right? That's another thing that we don't usually think about as humans, and noticing how changes in our energy or position or movement prompts shifts in everybody else. And then the photo at the bottom right was just at a recent herd observation presentation I did with a group of, I partnered with another local EAL practitioner, and we did a session at a PATH conference on herd observation. And this was just the hill that the participants got to sit on. It was beautiful. And so, you know, it can be a really enjoyable experience outside and very relaxing. And these are just things we don't usually think about being able to do in lesson programs. And this, I'm speaking specifically about an equine assisted learning business, but these could be incorporated into any kind of lesson program. And one of the real benefits is that you're going to learn a lot about your horses that you didn't know. You're going to learn a lot more about their relationships. The students are going to have a lot more empathy for, you know, why does the horse act a certain way when I take it away, you know, I go out and get it out of the pasture for its lesson and take it away from its herd mates, and how does that actually affect the herd mates who are left behind, because they then have to rebalance to this feeling of loss when one of their herd members has been taken out of the pasture. So it really builds empathy, something that I think the traditional horse industry often, I don't know that it's intentional, but it just teaches us actually to ignore or dismiss how the horses, or resent how the horses are feeling, versus just shifting it so that we can have empathy and we can say, you know, I really understand how that feels. I've had experiences like that as well. And I think when we do that, we're actually empowering the horses to really be partners in our business and bring their gifts and their wisdom and their knowledge and what they can teach us to the table, which is what we should be doing, right? It's not all about us. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Again, I'm sorry that we couldn't be here live to do the Q&A and comments that I wanted to do afterwards, but I will find a way for us to be able to do that related to this presentation. And we will hopefully be live for the next one. It's good that my Wi-Fi has stayed on for this entire presentation for me to record it. So I think I might be back up and in shape. So thank you for being here today. And I look forward to the next presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll see you all soon. Bye.